Today on Ag News Daily.
I think the reality is, if it's discovered, it's a major issue because it can spread quickly amongst animals, and it's very, very hard, so as you can imagine, to eradicate an airborne fly from moving around from beast to beast in a rangelands, that could be thousands of acres. I mean, it's very, very hard to contain.
Hey, listeners, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. Do you know what day it is?
It's Friday.
It's not Hump Day. That's correct. It is National French Fry Day. Which fast food chain do you think makes the best French fries?
Raising Cane's. Raising Cane.
Bops. That's it. Weather updates. Much of the Midwest picked up rain this week and several different waves of showers throughout this week. The wet pattern was expected to continue through the weekend into next week. It hasn't been all wet, though. We've seen some of those dry pockets that remain in parts of Illinois and Michigan. Temperatures, meanwhile, have been mildly warm and may trend hotter late next week. The central and southern plains have been scattered with storms. Throughout their time, rain has slowed parts of the winter wheat harvest, but it continues to support good corn and soybean growing weather. Like the Midwest, this stormy pattern is also expected to persist into next week, with more fronts on the way. Now turning our heads to the northern plains, they have had several rounds of rain as well. Though showers have been scattered and uneven, this active trend will continue and will bring more systems and occasional thunderstorms, some possibly severe, into next week. Rainfall will remain hit or miss for some of those folks as we look ahead, Delaney. So a wet week for most of us.
A wet week indeed. And that did well to affect the latest crop conditions report. U.S. crop conditions were mostly steady last week as corn continued to improve, with 47% rated good to excellent, up 1 percentage point from the week prior. 18% of the crop has now soaked, and 3% is in the dough stage. Soybeans are holding steady at 66% good to excellent, 32% of the crop has bloomed, and 8% is setting pods. Winter wheat stands at 48% good to excellent, harvest now at 53% complete, which is close to the 5-year average of 54%. Spring wheat conditions slipped slightly, however, now rated 50% good to excellent, down 3 percentage points from the previous week, and 61% of the crop has headed. So all in all, Tanner, still seeing some good crop conditions across the country.
That's correct. Earlier this week on Tuesday, the USDA introduced the National Farm Security Action Plan, which aims to strengthen the security of American agriculture. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins says that the plan targets to protect the U.S. farmland and the food supply from foreign ownership and influence. The plan includes 7 areas to support farmers and secure the nation's food resources. Those actions include 1, securing and protecting American farmland, 2, enhancing agricultural supply chain resilience, 3, protecting U.S. nutrition safety net from fraud and foreign exploitation, 4, the defending of agricultural research and innovation, 5, putting America first in every USDA program, 6, safeguarding the plant and animal health that we have known, and 7, protecting critical infrastructure. A lot of key things to focus on there, but the USDA will also focus research funding on American projects that will end agreements with foreign entities from certain countries. At least 700 foreign nationals from countries of concern, including China, will be removed from USDA contracts and research agreements. Additional actions will target over 550 other foreign entities that are considered a risk to American agriculture. Protecting plant and animal health is a key priority. Secretary Rollins emphasized the importance of domestic food production and reducing our reliance on imports for critical products such as beef. The plan also aims to strengthen the American supply chain and prevent fraud in nutrition programs and secure that vital infrastructure that farmers rely on throughout this country. The announcement comes after the Justice Department charged foreign nationals with smuggling a harmful fungus into the United States. I believe, Delaney, they came through the Des Moines airport.
Really? I had not heard that one, Tanner.
Yes.
Well, Secretary Rollins certainly has been busy this week because we officially saw some new leadership at the USDA. On Monday, former Judge Stephen Vaden was sworn in as the new Deputy Secretary. Deputy Vaden from Union City, Tennessee, previously served as USDA's general counsel. He now steps into the department's number 2 role, where he will work alongside Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins. He was very excited, it seemed like, across social media this week as he was stepping into that. The two will lead efforts to carry out President Trump's agricultural and nutrition policies under the One Big Beautiful Bill. Secretary Rollins welcomed Vaden, saying, quote, his policy and legal acumen will be a tremendous asset to the department. Deputy Vaden thanked the President and Secretary Rollins for their trust, saying, quote, I look forward to getting to work to support the Secretary in making agriculture great again. So good to see some new leadership there in the USDA, and looking forward to see what he has ahead here for American agriculture.
So it's good to start off with excitement, because I know he's got a lot on his table.
He certainly does.
Or his desk, or his plate, or whatever you want to throw at that. We did get some updates. The U.S. EPA heard comments from the biofuel industry groups on Tuesday, also as a part of a public hearing on proposed renewable fuel standards for 2026 and 2027. EPA officials Dallas Burkholder said that in 2026, the proposal includes 15 billion gallons of conventional ethanol, over 9 billion gallons of advanced biofuels, and 6 billion gallons of biomass-based diesel, along with 1 billion gallons of cellulosic biofuel. Burkholder also said the plan ensures the growth of supply of homegrown renewable fuels, helping the U.S. boost energy independence and security. Overall, the biofuel groups welcomed this new proposal. Growth Energy CEO Emily Score called it the strongest plan yet. She was quoted by saying, this is the strongest RFS proposal we have seen with the highest volumes ever. It shows the administration's commitment to the American biofuel producers and the farmers who depend upon them. We also heard from the Clean Fuels Alliance America group, who also testified with CEO Donnell Reagan. He is saying that the industry is ready to deliver. Reagan also was quoted by saying they supplied over 5 billion gallons of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and SAF in 2024, and were poised to supply even more in 2026. He urged the EPA to finalize the proposed volumes and resolve any uncertainties surrounding small refinery exemptions, which he says will loom over the market until finalized. The EPA is expected to finalize this rule in the fall. The fall's kind of vague, don't we?
We'll see, yeah. We'll see if it does actually get finalized in the fall. But nonetheless, they've put out some big targets there to achieve. Well, as we know, at the end of last week, the U.S. House passed President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, which was signed off, of course, by President Trump. Now, ag groups are weighing in on what this legislation could mean for producers. The American Farm Bureau Federation specifically highlights that $65 billion will be allocated for commodity programs, crop insurance, conservation, and specialty crops. The National Corn Growers Association applauds the strength that farm safety net programs and doubles funding for foreign market development. Ken Bacchus with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association calls the tax provisions a generational fix. The bill raises the estate tax exemption to $15 million per person and $30 million per couple. The bill also adjusts for inflation and makes the tax permanent. It also preserves the step-up in basis for inherited assets and locks in small business income deductions. The bill will also cut food assistance funding and extend the 45Z Clean Fuels tax credit through 2029. The credit is only available for fuels made from American-grown feedstocks. Brian Jennings with the American Coalition for Ethanol says the extension strengthens the program but should have run through 2031, while Renewable Fuels Association President Jeff Cooper said, quote, the bill provides much-needed growth for the biofuels industry. So another win there for the biofuels industry as well. Farm groups said they'll be watching Congress closely as the work continues on other priorities, but this was certainly a win for U.S. agriculture.
We've got plenty of news coming out of D.C. today for you in this episode. President Trump is willing to let migrant laborers stay on U.S. farms. So as stated, President Donald Trump has continued to pledge his support for farmers who depend upon this immigrant labor. At a rally in Iowa last week, President Trump said he would let farmers take the lead in allowing their workers to stay in the country. The plan would not offer a path to citizenship, but it would protect farm workers from being detained during workplace immigration raids. The president also said that by implementing a plan for farm workers to avoid being taken into custody, it will benefit the farming industry that contributed about $223 million to the nation's gross domestic product in 2023. During this event in Iowa, he also mentioned concerns about long-time workers being removed after more than 15 years in the field, emphasizing the role of experienced labor in maintaining farm productivity. So a couple of items there pulled out of his speech when he came to the fairgrounds.
And I know you were at the event, Tanner. Anything you want to add there?
You know, it was quite interesting to see the protection around him, obviously, and a lot of vagueness, I felt, but still exciting to have him come to your state.
Certainly. Well, continuing on with more policy-driven headlines, President Trump announced on Monday that exports from South Korea and Japan will face higher U.S. tariffs starting August 1st. In letters shared on his Truth Social account, he announced the new tariff rate at 25%. That's up from the 10% rate both countries have faced since April. In the letters, President Trump wrote, quote, "We have had years to discuss our trading relationship. The U.S. concluded that we must move away from these long-term and very persistent trade deficits." That 25% rate returns South Korea to the reciprocal trade level announced earlier this year. Meanwhile, Japan's tariff rate will increase slightly above the previously planned 24%. These new tariffs will apply on top of any existing sector-specific duties. However, he said he opens up the floor to negotiating lower tariffs if South Korea or Japan or other countries ease their trade barriers. He also added that some deals have already been reached, and more letters will be sent to U.S. trading partners later this month. So far, only a few trade deals have been reached between the U.S. and the U.K. and the U.S. and Vietnam. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said President Trump plans to issue an executive order next Monday to formally extend the current 90-day tariff pause until August 1st. And she said the president will send about a dozen more letters to trading partners this month. We also know Canada is on the chopping block here for an additional tariff, Brazil, and a few others here that will receive some of those letters here, Tanner, in the very short term.
I always think letters are funny. We can't send an email. But in other news, the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has officially ended its emergency response to the bird flu outbreak. The decision comes as the virus, which sickens dozens of people and drove up egg prices, has largely subsided. On Monday, the CDC combined bird flu updates with its regular seasonal flu reports that were previously done separately. The agency will now provide monthly updates on a number of people that have been tested for the virus, but will no longer report the infection rates in animals. States hit hardest by the outbreak, like California and Washington, have also scaled back their emergency efforts. A spokesperson for the Department of Health and Human Services says that the CDC is transitioning from emergency response to routine monitoring. However, bird flu surveillance will continue under the agency's existing influenza programs. So it sounds like a positive move in the right direction there for our poultry producers. Dr. Shah, who recently resigned as the CDC Principal Deputy Director, reported the decision. He explained that with no recent human cases, there's no need for intense daily response efforts. In addition, USDA reported only a few cases in the past month. One case was confirmed in cattle in Arizona, and 3 new cases were reported in commercial and backyard chickens across Arizona, Idaho, and Pennsylvania. The last major outbreak in poultry was clear back in May, which happened in Arizona, which affected millions of birds. While officials will continue to monitor bird flu activity, some health experts warn that reducing attention could make it harder to detect the dangerous changes within the virus. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. But Dean Blumberg, head of pediatric infectious diseases at the University of California, was quoted saying, "If you miss an uptick, then you'll be one step behind, and that could lead to more widespread transmission and more herds being infected and more people being infected." So I can see both sides of the perspective there.
Well, one final disease we've been keeping an eye on, I guess you could say, has been New World Screwworm, and get some major updates this week as a new case of New World Screwworm has been detected just 160 miles from the U.S. and Mexico border. Tanner, following this detection, swift action has been taken by the USDA. The agency had previously planned to reopen 5 southern ports for livestock trade and bring in imports from Mexico starting back on July 7th, but due to the latest case, Secretary Rollins ordered immediate halt to all livestock imports from Mexico. Secretary Rollins says the U.S. is pausing that reopening to protect American livestock and the nation's food supply. She added the ports will remain closed until Mexico shows progress in containing the pest across multiple states. USDA officials say early detection and aggressive monitoring were what made this quick response and decision possible. Additionally, making headlines, the Mexican government has begun building a $51 million facility in southern Mexico to fight the New World Screwworm. Mexico's agriculture ministry says the plant, a joint project with the U.S., will produce 100 million sterile screwworm flies each week once it opens in the first half of next year. The goal of releasing these sterile flies is to help reduce the wild screwworm population and control the pest. Mexico and U.S. are splitting the bill, Mexico paying for about $21 million of this project, the U.S. contributing about $30 million. The U.S. also plans to open a sterile fly dispersal facility in Texas once this is all ready to go to help fight the screwworm. And Tanner, what a perfect headline to wrap up our news segment with, because we are chatting about the New World Screwworm today with our guest on the show, Ranchbot CEO Andrew Coppin. So let's get into that conversation now.
Well, Tanner, I am really excited for this conversation today, happening at such a great time, as we talked about earlier in the news segment. The announcement this week shutting down the borders to Mexican cattle imports because of the New World Screwworm. We're chatting today with Andrew Coppin, the CEO and founder of Ranchbot. Andrew, you are literally boots on the ground perspective, chatting with farmers and ranchers about the New World Screwworm. Excited to get your perspective on this. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
No, thanks very much for having me, guys. It's great to be here with you. Yes, well, obviously, this ongoing saga with screwworm and the opening and closing of the border is very topical and front of mind for a lot of ranchers, especially on the southern borders. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, the potential is a serious threat to the beef cattle industry and not to be taken lightly. So I think, there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of, consternation about what the best course of action is, because obviously we're also in a time where, beef cattle prices are pushing all-time highs. Demand is very high for the product. And as I'm sure you know, supply is really as low as it's been since the 1960s. So there's a lot of dynamics happening in the industry at the moment, and this sort of burden hanging over people's heads doesn't make operations easier.
So for perspective, give us an idea of how close to the border you are currently.
Well, I mean, now my operations for Ranchbot are based out of Fort Worth in Texas, but I've got people who are working with ranchers all across the southern borders of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, because we're out, putting in remote monitoring solutions for ranchers, which, we monitor all of the water and infrastructure on ranches, which are obviously is prescient in the scheme of New World Screwworm, because obviously if we were to see, in the very unfortunate circumstances, we were to see issues or that come closer, I think the first line of defense would be to create quarantine areas and limit travel and, make sure that no one was transporting cattle or things from one area to the other, which sort of means if you're going to minimize transport and minimize moving around, as you know, hundreds of thousands of ranchers are driving around every day checking water. If suddenly they can't, or they're not meant to be in certain areas, remote monitoring and control of water systems, so your cattle are safe and they've got water, is going to become pretty important.
Now, you don't sound like you're from Fort Worth.
Oh, you wouldn't pick up my southern Texas accent? No, I'm from the southernmost county of Texas, about 8,000 miles to the southwest. Grew up and spent a lot of time around farms and cattle ranches in Australia. And we built our company there where we look after about 10 million beef cattle and about 15 million sheep, and then moved here to Texas about 2 years ago.
Andrew, thanks for sharing some of that background and perspective with us. You know, when you mentioned earlier, just all of the moving dynamics right now between the screwworm, market dynamics, having this shrinking cattle herd, I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective, because when we talk about just markets on the podcast, it's like, oh, the market's hit a new high this week in live cattle and feeder cattle. You think about it from that perspective, you're thinking, wow, the cattle markets are doing so well, producers are doing so well. There's just so much more to the story than that, especially for folks in your area. Talk to us a little bit about some of the mindset and questions and concerns that you're getting, and some of the conversations you're having right now with some of the ranchers down in Texas in your area.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some ranchers' whole business models revolve around getting cattle out of Mexico and moving them through the supply chain. Obviously now they've had to take a completely different course of action. And I guess the issues of the supply-demand equation for beef cattle that have been, evolving over the last couple of years, everyone's been questioning, when will people start rebuilding their herds? Due to a combination of factors, particularly, weather, drought. Ranchers can only put so many cattle on the pasture. They need pasture, and if they haven't got pasture, they need to buy feed, and that's expensive. So, whilst everyone's looking for that indicator of when we're going to start rebuilding, I'm not really seeing any ranchers that are saying they're on that path as yet, because they've still been managing around drought and other issues relating to weather and pasture. Despite recent tragedies like the floods in Texas and in New Mexico, that belies a broader context that there's still 25% of the country as grazing lands are in drought. So you sort of look at that backdrop and then think about the pressures of trying to rebuild my herd. I want to generate cash flow if I'm a rancher, but I don't really want to be selling cattle, even though the prices are really high. And now I'm faced with greater restrictions of cattle coming across the border. I don't think you'd find any rancher that wouldn't agree shutting the border down for safety is the right decision and the right thing to do. But it's still putting additional pressure on the market dynamics of the beef industry, at a time when the US consumers' love affair with beef is at an all-time high, and seemingly there's not a lot to stop it. I mean, it's certainly the most preferred, meat protein in the market, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Andrew, from a biosecurity perspective, you mentioned some of the software IoT that you're using for Ranchbot. What kind of additional biosecurity concerns are ranchers having right now, or measures are they putting in place to ensure, hey, this isn't going to impact my herd? Or what concerns do they have if screwworm would cross the border and come into Texas cattle?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, I think the seemingly the emergency plans in the event that was to evolve would be to create lockdown areas and quarantine areas and limit the flow and movement of livestock and people in and out of different areas, where the risk is that you keep moving the screwworm flies into other areas. So I guess it's just the hesitancy of will that happen or won't it happen? I'm trying to run a business. I mean, ranching is already a difficult enough business. It's not like you need more stresses or challenges around delivering your product in the market, and now you've just got this other dynamic that's there. So, I mean, obviously, biosecurity risks are very material, because they can impact entire areas, and obviously, if they were to get hold and get out of control, be having devastating ramifications for the industry, which of course no one wants. And whilst it might drive prices even higher, the net net is that it would be negative for, both the ranchers and consumers. So I think the risks are real and the risks have to be managed. And there's a lot of really, really good people and, working in industry and, and the government to try and make sure that, this does not happen.
So what do you know about the science behind the strategy to breed and release a lot more flies to help curb the spread of this screwworm?
Yes, well, I think that's a strategy that's been used before to release infertile flies because, as I understand it, they only sort of mate once and then, they die. So that's the strategy that had been used in the past, and facilities are now being set up to replicate that and to allow to release that. The challenges, of course, are the volume that's required to do that and the timing. And of course, when you're talking about airborne animals that can travel on a breeze, it's challenging because things could move in a particular direction quickly through no real fault of anyone other than Mother Nature. So I think it's a tried and proven method that will help eradicate, and self-manage the issue. The execution risk is the challenge to get enough flies in time to prevent those issues.
So if you're a cattle producer and you do discover this, is there a treatment, a spray, a vaccine for the beef producers to be able to use on their herds?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure of what the immediate response would be from a medical perspective. That's a better question for a vet or someone in the animal health arena. I'm more in the ranch management side of things and not close enough to know. But I think the reality is if it's discovered, it's a major issue because it can spread quickly amongst animals. And, it's very, very hard, as you can imagine, to eradicate an airborne fly from moving around from beast to beast in a rangelands, that could be thousands of acres. It's very, very hard to contain. So I think the primary strategy is really one of, stopping the transmission altogether, because once you've got it, things are significantly more dire and consequential.
Andrew, for some of those farmers and ranchers listening to the podcast today that may not be located in the state of Texas, they might feel like this is hundreds of miles away from where they are located. But as you mentioned, flies move quickly. Mother Nature, doesn't really get to determine. We don't get to determine where this fly would potentially go. What's a message you'd want to share with them, with people who are feeling this is a ways away from me, it doesn't affect me, it's at arm's length from me?
I think the ranching community as a whole is, pretty well connected, and everyone does, support one another, whether it's through fires or floods or other, things that we have to deal with in the industry. I think it's a strong community, and there is a general understanding of the challenges, and no one really wants that to become a broader issue for anyone, no matter if they're on the southern border or the northern border. So I think, I think people should know that there's a lot of smart people doing a lot of planning, a lot of thinking, and a lot of proactive management of this situation, and are watching it very, very carefully to ensure that it just doesn't get out of hand. And I think that's the key thing to know. There's been many conferences and many groups getting together to talk about the what if scenarios, and that prevention is better than cure.
That's great. We appreciate you having the insight that you have on what's happening right now and today. We didn't get you a lot of time to talk about Ranchbot, so if our listeners want to go check it out, what is the best way for them to gather some more information?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. You can get more information about Ranchbot at www.ranch-bot.com. We're a remote monitoring company specializing in monitoring water, tanks, pumps, infrastructure. And obviously its relevance to this discussion, as I mentioned, is, if you are quarantined and you can't move around your property, and you need to be able to check things remotely. We can do all of that for ranchers and save them material, time, money, and give them peace of mind across their ranch. So, but it's great to be working with the ranchers of the United States and, helping them run a better operation.
That's right. Well, we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Well, what a good conversation. But we did see in 2023 and 24, disaster assistance for farmers is now available through Secretary Rollins' expedited update of the federal disaster assistance for Central Texas flood victims. Farmers who lost their crops in natural disasters in 23 or 24 can now apply for help through the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program. USDA is offering a $16 billion package in aid, which will be distributed in 2 stages by the Farm Service Agency. Stage 1 is open to producers who already received support through crop insurance through the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program. Applications will be available at your local FSA office, and pre-filled forms are being mailed out to some producers. Stage 2, which begins this fall for producers with shallow or uncovered losses. Losses may be tied to natural disasters that come from 23 and 24. Drought losses must have been occurring during a D2 or D3 or more severe drought to qualify. Speaking of natural disasters, though, the USDA is also supporting those affected by the catastrophic flooding that occurred in Central Texas. Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins says the federal teams are assisting with debris removal, providing emergency meals and disaster relief access to those producers, unfortunately, in the way. We also saw the U.S. Forest Service is supporting search and rescue efforts, while the National Resource Conservation Service is monitoring dams and aiding in the recovery efforts as well. But for a full list of USDA disaster assistance programs and details on each of these, you can visit the Rural Development Disaster Assistance page on the USDA website. So a lot of updates there from those announcements that were made this week.
Certainly there are, Tanner, but let's take a quick look at the markets here before we wrap up today's show. Following a shortened holiday week last week, the markets were certainly in full force this week. Today's big news, a WSDA report, will be released at noon Central Time as of today, Friday, when we are recording today's show. And markets have been shoring up positions heading into this final session of the week. No major changes are expected to be posted with today's report, and most of the trade is expecting the report to be a neutral non-event for the markets, meaning we should be reverting back to watching weather and trade following today's hubbub. Taking a look at the livestock futures, cattle futures set new highs this week after the abrupt closure of the U.S. border to Mexican livestock imports. Live cattle were supported as well by U.S. tariffs on Brazilian beef at 50% tariff rates, as that is where the bulk of U.S. beef imports come from, specifically ground beef. October live cattle hit here around 220 on the board, and November feeder cattle touched 321 on the board. So still seeing markets move full steam ahead. October live cattle, I believe, touched around $97 on the board. And we'll continue to watch here where those cattle markets go. Certainly interesting to hear Andrew's perspective on that as well in our interview today.
It would have been great to see corn markets go higher with all the positive biofuel news that we got. So maybe we'll get to report on some of that for next week. But I know it's spare time for a lot of you. Actually excited for one of our next interviews here on Farm for Profit tied to the Iowa State Fair. So it seems like county fairs will all lead up to the big state fair.
Well, Blaine and I, my husband, were just reading through all of the new Iowa State Fair foods. There are 50 some, it seems like, Tanner. So
yeah.
We might have to do a little food trying on the podcast.
That would be right. Listeners, if you've got a favorite fair food, make sure you send that to us. Otherwise, if you've got guests or topics you want us to cover, make sure you reach out. Follow us on all of our social media platforms. We appreciate each and every one of you. So I think it's time to go. What do you say, Delaney?
Yeah, let's let him go.